This is the case of Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby was a nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, now she has become infamous for her heinous actions during the years of 2015 and 2016 while she worked in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. During this time, she took the lives of 7 innocent infants and attempted to harm 6 more. Originally, there was 22 charges against Lucy Letby, but this was a circumstantial case and not all of the charges against her could be proven. Lucy's actions deeply shocked and saddened the community, as well as the medical profession as a whole. After a thorough investigation, she was found guilty of these grave crimes and received 14 whole life sentences. Now, these sentences are the harshest sentences one can receive. Lucy Letby's case is a dark reminder of the tragic consequences that can occur when those entrusted with care and compassion abuse their position. Her actions solidified her sad legacy as the most prolific SK in history of the United Kingdom.
Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
Just over 9 months ago, the trial of Lucy Letby began. She was accused of the most shocking of crimes, the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others. She always denied all the charges. Attempted murder of 17 babies.
And, after deliberating for 22 days, the jury found Lucy Letby guilty of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire. She will go down as the most prolific child killer in British history.
We left her alone, and predominantly at night.
I was praying to my God to see my boy and help him. I was asking my God to save him. My husband was not saying anything, but he was crying and crying.
We made the decision to switch off the machines and let her go. It was by far the hardest decision of my life. Our daughter was in my husband's arms when she took her last breath and silently passed away.
And to kind of put across the emotion of it being in there, you know, some of these, I'm a mum, you know, some of these mums had to get up there and describe what they'd seen and what had happened to their child. And obviously Lucy Letby is in the room. Yeah, she's in the room as well. And a courtroom is quite a scary place as well. You know, if you're not used to being in a courtroom, they're austere places.
She also tried to smother. One child had a really serious, violent liver injury, but she had one particular method.
Well, the prosecution said that her favourite method of killing and harming these babies was injecting them with air, and that caused an air bubble or an air embolus in their bloodstream, which blocked the blood flow and essentially killed them that way. Now, we don't really know what triggered this kind of killing spree that she went on, but we do know that she went on a course which taught her how to deal with long lines and injecting medicine into certain cannulas, and there were prosecution speculated that maybe that was what taught her about air embolus, and that's when she went on to kill baby A couple of weeks later.
2 weeks before the death of baby A, Lucy Letby completed a course relating to intravenous lines, and on the course, the dangers of air embolus were mentioned. Is that just a coincidence, or is that what gave her the idea? We will never know. We say Lucy Letby killed baby A with an injection of air into the bloodstream. When he collapsed, she was standing over him. She tried the same thing with his sister the following night, but miraculously she survived.
So baby D was another child that was injected with air. She was the 3rd baby to die in a fortnight in June 2015. And she was actually the only baby in the case that was full term. She wasn't premature. And the reason she was there was because her mum had had a really long and difficult labour. She'd been in labour for 60 hours, and the doctors thought that she had an infection when she was born because she was having a few problems breathing. So that's the reason she was in the neonatal unit.
We'll examine why anyone would harm children on this scale and look at the failings that left her free to kill for so long.
Once we realised we had great concerns about Lucy Letby and she was removed from the neonatal unit, why did it take 11 months for the police to then be called in?
We'll hear from the families of some of the victims on their long quest for justice. And I speak to the mother of a prematurely born baby who believes her child was targeted by Lucy Letby.
Her job was to care, to heal.
Devious, cold-blooded, calculated.
Lucy Letby attacked those she was meant to protect.
She used that normality and the trust that she gained to commit crimes of an unimaginable scale.
It's horrific to think of because you wouldn't think that nobody would be capable of that.
Lucy Letby will be remembered as a killer with victims so small they could be carried in one hand.
Good evening from the Countess of Chester Hospital. This is where Lucy Letby worked as a nurse in the neonatal unit, trusted to keep newborn babies alive during their first hours and days in the world. Instead, she murdered 7 children and attempted to kill 6 more. Her crimes make her the most prolific child killer in modern British history. She refused to appear in court for the final verdicts and will be sentenced on Monday, when again she is expected to be absent. The government has already announced an independent inquiry into how she was able to continue working here, even after consultants warned hospital bosses that she was dangerous. Sky's North of England correspondent Caterina Vitozzi followed the trial at Manchester Crown Court and sent this report, which I should warn, does contain distressing details.
Hello, Lucy, is it? Yes. Hello, my name's Chester Police. Okay, step in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Lucy Letby's crimes are difficult to comprehend. Her victims, babies, so tiny, so fragile, so many. But her arrest in 2018 led today to her conviction, and now this shocking title as the most prolific child killer of modern British history.
Lucy Letby was entrusted to protect some of the most vulnerable babies. Little did those working alongside her know that there was a murderer in their midst.
The jury at Manchester Crown Court deliberated for 22 days, agreeing that Letby killed 7 babies and attacked 6 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital. But in court and in police questioning, she always repeatedly denied she'd done anything wrong.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes. I think we don't just notice as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was compared to previous years.
This used to be Nursery 1, also coined the hot room.
But we now know colleagues on this neonatal unit raised suspicions about Letby months before bosses moved her off the ward and well over a year before police were called in.
This case has had a profound impact on our patients and our local community, and also our staff, who come to work every day determined to provide safe and high quality care for all of our patients. Our staff are devastated by what has happened, and we are committed to ensuring that lessons continue to be learned.
The government has asked for an independent inquiry into this, and Cheshire Police have confirmed they will look into the other years of Letby's career to see if she harmed other babies. Lucy Letby decided not to leave the courthouse cells today and appear in the dock to hear those verdicts being announced. But many of the victims' families were here, the majority in tears, comforting each other. The mother of one child held a stuffed toy rabbit to her face as they learnt that a woman they thought would care for their children actually attacked and killed them.
This has been a long and emotional journey for all of the families involved in this case. I speak on behalf of the entire prosecution team when I say that all of their babies will forever be in our hearts.
Lucy Letby's parents have also been in court, at times mouthing "I love you" to their daughter. But families of the victims say for them this trial has been utter hell. These are the parents of child L and M, twin boys that Lucy Letby attacked, speaking to media for the very first time.
There's no doubt it's going to affect me for the rest of my life. There's no way you can get away from it. It's always going to be there in the back of your mind. It's been hell, to be honest.
Very, very horrendous. I want a life sentence.
But it's not going to do justice no matter what. She's taken lives. She's tried to take other babies' lives. So whatever sentence she gets, it's not going to be enough. It will be justice, but it won't be enough, whatever the sentence comes.
But it is a sentence that Lucy Letby will not hear in person. Leaving the courthouse today in a prison van, she said she won't appear at Monday's sentencing. The woman who hid her crimes behind a smile and an NHS badge, now refusing to let victims' parents see her as justice is served.
The details are just so difficult to listen to, aren't they? And Katerina joins me now from Manchester Crown Court. Katerina, we know that these verdicts have actually been delivered over a number of days. A reporting restriction has been lifted and we're now able to explain more clearly what happened. What was the reaction from the public gallery on those days that the verdicts came, and indeed the reaction from Letby herself?
Extremely emotional, to sum it up in just a couple of...
It's the case nobody wanted to believe could be true. But for the police, convicting Lucy Letby was the culmination of a painstaking and distressing investigation.
The key aspect of this investigation has been always asking ourselves, who else could it be, if not her, and what else could it be?
Lucy Letby started working at the Countess of Chester Hospital in January 2012, just before her 22nd birthday. She joined as a nurse in the neonatal unit. But from January 2015, the mortality rate at the unit began to rise above what might be considered normal rates. On June the 8th, a baby boy, child A, died. He and his twin sister were being cared for in Nursery 1, the room for the most poorly patients. At 8 o'clock, Lucy Letby was half an hour into her night shift. She was the designated nurse for the baby boy that night. 26 minutes later, Letby called a doctor over to child A's incubator. He was deteriorating rapidly. Staff began resuscitation and an on-call consultant responded to the emergency. The baby died just before 9 o'clock, less than 90 minutes into Letby's shift. Air had been injected into his bloodstream.
It was unexpected and unexplained are two words they don't deal with in neonatal medicine. If a child collapses, it's usually explainable, and it's usually always expected.
Then on the 5th of August, another baby, child F, was in Nursery 2. Letby was looking after another infant in the same room, but at 1:54 in the morning, child F suffered an unexpected drop in his blood sugar and a surge in his heart rate. The baby survived, and a blood test revealed he'd been given insulin that he didn't need. There was no reason why. No baby on the unit was being prescribed it. It was kept in a locked fridge next to the nurse's station. That summer of 2015, was when colleagues became suspicious. They were told it was very unlikely there was anything going on and were urged not to make a fuss. Dr. Ravi Jairam was one of those doctors who spoke out. He said he'd become extremely uncomfortable with Lucy Letby working on the unit. And this pattern continued as there were more babies who lost their lives or suffered unexpected collapses. On the 23rd of June 2016, Letby was looking after child O, a triplet. The baby boy became unwell. Another nurse suggested the child be moved back to nursery 1, where the most poorly babies are cared for. But Letby disagreed, and the baby collapsed. He recovered, but suffered 2 further collapses, and at 5:47, the baby was pronounced dead. Consultant Dr. Breary believed the baby should have responded better to resuscitation. Child O was found to have an injury to his liver and air injected into his bloodstream. The following day, Child O's brother, Child P, another of the triplets, died under Lucy Letby's care. It prompted Dr. Breary to say that he wasn't happy with Lucy Letby working on the unit, but he was told there was no evidence against her and that she would continue nursing. But Letby's suspicious colleagues were right. She'd been attacking babies here for the past 12 months. Over the next few months, the hospital carried out a review as to what was happening inside the neonatal unit. Lucy Letby was then moved to an administrative role. In November 2016, an external report found no definitive explanation for the high number of deaths. But in May the following year, the hospital called in the police.
The initial focus was around the hypotheses of what could have occurred. So a generic hypothesis of it could be natural occurring deaths, it could be natural occurring collapses, it could be an organic reason, it could be a virus, and then one of the hypotheses was that it could be inflicted harm.
The more experts they talked to, the more evidence they gathered, the more the case started to take shape. Then, on the 3rd of July 2018, Lucy Letby was arrested.
What was clear at that point was that Lucy Letby was the consistent in all this. She was the thread running through them all. And therefore, in evidential terms, the biggest source of evidence.
Searches of her home in Chester and her parents' house in Hereford uncovered patient records and handwritten notes that gave clues about her state of mind. Among the scrawled notes were the words, "I am evil. I did this." In her bedroom, stuffed into these shopping bags, were hospital handover sheets. In total, 257 were found. Many included details of the babies Letby had allegedly harmed. Her social media showed searches for 11 of the families affected. Police also discovered that she sent one of her alleged victims' parents a sympathy card on the day of the baby's funeral. She kept an image of the card on her phone. Crucially, the police also analysed her shift patterns. Look at the line of crosses. They showed that Letby was the only member of staff on shift when all the incidents took place. On the 11th of November 2020, over 2 years after she was arrested, Lucy Letby was charged with murder and attempted murder.
Yeah.
And so in the evening of the 3rd of August, she'd been down to see them in the neonatal unit. She'd changed their nappy, she'd done what's called their cares, so she'd kind of wiped their eyes and their neck. And then a couple of hours later, around 9 o'clock at night, she went to deliver some breast milk, and that's when she arrived on the neonatal unit and described hearing her son screaming, an horrendous scream it was described as, and that's when the prosecution said she actually interrupted Lucy Letby mid-attack.
I could hear my son crying, and it was like nothing I had heard before. I walked over to the incubator to see blood coming out of his mouth, and I panicked. I was panicking because I felt like there was something wrong.
Was Lucy Letby near your son when you walked in?
No, there was a workstation, and she was at the workstation.
Just describe what you could hear.
I could hear crying.
What sort of crying?
It was a sound that should not have come from a tiny baby. It was horrendous. It was more of a scream than a cry.
How long before you walked into the room could you hear that?
I could hear it in the little corridor.
What was Lucy Letby doing as you walked in, hearing what you could hear?
She was busy doing something, but she wasn't near my son.
And when baby E's mum actually went into the room, to the cot, to see him, now he had blood around his mouth at that point, and she was really worried. But she went back to the ward because Lucy Letby told her to. But later, when he collapsed and doctors were trying to save him, this bleeding got worse and worse.
Yeah, and one of the doctors also noticed that he had a rash on his body, and he remembered that this rash was like the one that he'd seen on baby A. And sadly, they worked on him for almost 50 minutes, and the doctors just couldn't save him, and he died in the early hours.
I mean, 50 minutes of CPR on a tiny baby.
And obviously his parents were called in, and they watched a lot of that process, and sadly had to watch him slip away.
But we come back to the rash again that keeps coming up in this trial. Still at this point, the doctors and nurses were noticing it, but didn't know why it was there, didn't know what it meant, didn't know really that it was significant. But then there's a moment, isn't there, again, which is why we've picked this out from the podcast, because it was a bit of a turning point, really, in the doctors and nurses wondering what was going on. So one of the doctors in this case, a doctor called Ravi Jairam, he was a consultant. He started to research this rash.
Not till much later on, but yeah.
A lot later on, but he then realised that this rash could be a consequence, a sign of an air embolus.
Dr. Jariam said he didn't realise the clinical significance of the rash until months later, after more babies had died, and it had been present in others who collapsed. He said the research paper, which the jury heard is well known among paediatricians, examined the effect of air embolus, that's air in the circulation of newborns, and it described almost exactly the rash and the skin discoloration that was seen on the body of baby A.
I remember sitting on my sofa at home with the iPad, and I remember reading that description and the physical chill that went down my spine because it fitted with what we were seeing.
So it was at this point, after the deaths of baby D and baby E, that doctors on this unit started to look at what was going on, because it just didn't feel right. These babies who shouldn't be collapsing and dying, they were collapsing and dying unexpectedly. They were meant to be going home, they were meant to be getting better. And Dr. Ravi Jairam started to look at it, along with another doctor called Stephen Breary. And the two of them started to look at what was going on.
And they noticed, which is the key thing, that Lucy Letby was on duty every single time one of these babies collapsed or died.
My criminal psychologist, Dr. David Holmes. Dr. Holmes, good to have you on the programme. I guess, first of all, your reaction today, having listened to much of the evidence over the last few months, having seen coverage of it, your reaction to those verdicts?
I was very relieved, because it's always very touch and go when it comes to these kind of cases, because it's a situation where you have not got any really concrete evidence. One piece, like a CCTV camera footage or a witness, etc. All you've got is accumulation of, basically very low-level evidence, coincidences, etc. But when you actually accumulate a large number of these, something called a Bayesian analysis, it's actually more statistically sound to have 100 little arrows pointing towards Lucy and none pointing away from her. And I think that is how justice was actually reached today.
Yes, this case was fascinating, wasn't it? Because a lot of the evidence was circumstantial. As you say, incredibly, no CCTV cameras within the unit itself, and also no one witnessed her and could say so for 100% certain that she was attacking a child. No one saw her physically doing that. And also, I'm interested to get your thoughts on the lack of apparent motive.
Well, it's very difficult in these cases, what we call Munchausen by proxy, to ascertain what the motive is, because it seems completely, transparent. It doesn't exist as far as a normal person looking at the case would ever think, because it is clearly outside the realms of normal behaviour, normal thinking. But in this particular case, you can see that there's a glimmer there of someone who has no empathy, has no real feelings for others, someone who is born with psychopathic tendencies, and who has focused on this idea of controlling and harming children as being something that gives them satisfaction or pleasure in some bizarre way. It may have taken a lifetime to arrive at that kind of conclusion that that is what she wants to do, because someone with psychopathic tendencies does not get the kind of sensitive enjoyment from life that most of us do. So they kind of seek what it is, and it often ends up being manipulating, controlling, or even harming others.
We know that she'd been a student here at the hospital before getting a full-time job, and it was some years before she started to carry out her attacks, as far as we know. What changes in someone's mind to be seemingly a hard-working, dedicated professional and then switching to being a killer?
In the cases of these Munchausen individuals, there is no real switching. The propensity is always there. It's stumbling across a situation where there are infinite possibilities. In other words, you're in a chaotic situation, you're in control of a small patient. The patient cannot speak up for themselves and say, oh, the nurse did that to me yesterday. And therefore, you're in an ideal situation to fall into the role of someone who will take control of that individual, kill that individual, and then stare at the parents morbidly, satisfying themselves on the reaction.
What did you make of the methods that she used to kill? Because she changed the method, didn't she? She didn't stick to just one way of killing these babies. What can we read?
It was exceptionally, probably the most emotional time.
Them in the hospital where she worked. Many words will be used to describe the crimes of Lucy Letby, and there is a question that will also be asked many times. Why would she? Why would a nurse whose job it was to care for babies murder and harm them in the hospital where she worked? There is a reality, I think, that we may never really know the answer to that. I was in court as Lucy Letby gave evidence. She didn't give us an answer. She said all of this was a conspiracy against her, that she did nothing wrong. But there are other questions where I think there will increasingly be a demand for answers, like how was she able to do this, and should she have been stopped sooner? This is the morning of Lucy Letby's arrest.
Oh, Lucy, is it?
Yes.
Hello, my name's Chester, please. Okay, step in 2 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
The smile's gone, and she's in handcuffs a few minutes later.
Not a problem.
A nurse who murdered babies, Lucy Letby has always denied and never explained.
I'm going to put you in the back seat over here.
Now guilty of using her job to kill again and again.
Tragedy. These were deliberate murders from a serial killer.
I think they would share the grief of the families that are involved. I think the decision to harm a child is one of the most depraved acts that somebody can commit, and to actually kill a child is unimaginable. And I think that most people in this city will actually be standing alongside these families in their grief and their sorrow.
And I'm sure that will be nationwide, but what people have also discovered today is the background to this and what happened as doctors tried to raise the alarm with the hospital management. What do you make of what you've heard today, and what do you think the people who are supposed to be served by that hospital will think?
Well, as soon as the verdicts came in this afternoon, I wrote to the Secretary of State, Steve Barclay, and requested a full, independent and public inquiry into the circumstances around Letby's crimes. I'm pleased that he's replied to me. He's issued a statement saying that there will be an inquiry and that it will be quick and it will be flexible. I do think, however, that wider questions have emerged today from staff who were involved at the time about the response of the organisation that need to be addressed, and I think a full public inquiry is the way to do that.
So you want this inquiry to be upgraded, do you, to a statutory public inquiry with the ability to compel witnesses to come forward and to give evidence on oath?
I think everybody needs the answers, and I think if that's the way forward, then that's what we'll need. I have written back to the Health Secretary to ask him why the decision has been taken to make it a non-statutory inquiry, and I wait to hear what the rationale is behind that decision. But I really do feel that the community here in Chester and more widely across the country want to hear answers and want to understand why these circumstances were allowed to take place.
Do you think that statement today and the failure to answer any questions by the hospital was acceptable? Was it adequate?
I think that there are wider questions. I think an inquiry is the way to deal with them. I think that there are many questions that have arisen as the aftermath of the verdict has come forward. I think it needs to be dealt with quickly, and I think that the organisation is going to have a lot of answers to provide to the wider community, and actually the NHS as a whole needs to consider its response to these heinous crimes.
Because the trouble is, of course, there have been killers in hospitals before, in the health service before, and there have been inquiries, and each case is slightly different, and so the actions after those inquiries perhaps haven't quite caught the next one. I mean, how do you think you can actually take the steps needed now, after this particularly shocking set of crimes, to tackle this and to stop it happening again? Do you think that's possible?
I hope so. I mean, I really do, for the community that I represent who is served by this local hospital. I think anybody living in this city, living in this wider community, needs to know that this hospital is a safe place for them to be treated in. And I think that a full public inquiry that's held independently can establish that for the residents that I represent.
And just finally, do you have confidence in that hospital right now? Do you think people can be confident in going there and feeling safe?
I think that the clinical staff who acted in the way that they did and have described how they took forward the suspicions that they had should give people confidence that there are staff in that hospital working hard and in the best interests of the patients that they serve, day in, day out.
Samantha Dixon, thank you very much. Matt.
Well, speaking outside court today, Cheshire Constabulary paid tribute to the exceptional strength shown by families during the investigation and read a statement on their behalf.
This has been a long and emotional journey for all of the families involved in this case. I speak on behalf of the entire prosecution team when I say that all of their babies will forever be in our hearts. I would like to thank all of the families in this case for their exceptional resilience and strength throughout this entire investigation. Their composure and their dignity during this trial has been truly overwhelming. I cannot begin to imagine how the families in this case feel today. I just hope that today's verdicts bring all of them some peace of mind for the future, and that we have answered some of the questions that they were looking for.
Words cannot effectively explain how we are feeling at this moment in time. We are quite simply stunned. To lose a baby is a heartbreaking experience that no parent should ever have to go through. But to lose a baby, or to have a baby harmed in these particular circumstances, is unimaginable. Over the past 7 to 8 years, we've had to go through a long, torturous and emotional journey. From losing our precious newborns and grieving their loss, seeing our children who survived, some of whom are still suffering today, to being told years later that their death or collapse might be suspicious. Nothing can prepare you for that news. Today, justice has been served, and a nurse who should have been caring for our babies has been found guilty of harming them. But this justice will not take away from the extreme hurt, anger and distress that we've all had to experience. Some families did not receive the verdict that they expected, and therefore it is a bittersweet result. We are heartbroken, devastated, angry and feel numb. We may never truly know why this happened.
Speak to him now. John outlined lots of issues there, didn't he, for the government? But why don't we start with that one? Letby refusing to come up into the courtroom from her cell and saying that she's determined not to come up on Monday for her sentencing, causing huge distress, yet more distress for the families.
Well, that's right. It's the ultimate final insult that is being administered by this mass murderer to the families of these innocent victims. It's adding insult to the massive injury that's been caused. And of course, this will be a process not just where the judge will explain to the defendant the crimes and the gravity of the crimes, but for the victims' personal statements to be read into the record, introduced into the court, so that the wider world understands the full devastating impact of these atrocious crimes upon so many grieving families. And that's why I think it's right that we do everything we can to stop this sort of behaviour from becoming a trend. We've seen far too many of these cases recently, and that's why the government is right to act, and it should be acting as soon as possible to change the law.
I suppose the issue is that no judge wants a defendant to be dragged kicking and screaming and being violent towards prison officers, because that's not really going to be conducive, is it, to how a court works? But you have another solution.
Well, my solution would be to avoid that sort of scene from developing, and from, in effect, the defendant once again getting control of things, to have a live link into the cell with the sound and video on, so that the defendant has no choice. They have to hear what's being said, and the judge and everybody in the court will be confident knowing that as they speak, this is being broadcast to the defendant, who literally has no place to hide. That, I think, could be a compromise solution for now. I think the government is right to look carefully at the options here. In a case like this, where, you know, the sentence is yet to be passed, but it will be, I'm sure, one of the, you know, a very, very steep sentence indeed under the life sentence provisions that will apply for murder. There will be cases where perhaps an extra factor, you know, contempt of court or an additional sentence could be added, which would then reflect the non-cooperation of a defendant and their refusal to face up to the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, a campaign continued after the death of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, that little girl shot dead last year on Merseyside. So we know that the government thinks this is a good idea, and yet we seem to be a long way from it being legislated for.
Well, the government have got the Victims and Prisoners Bill currently going through the House of Commons. It's going to come back for further stages later in the year. That's an opportunity, I think, for the government to act. I think that legislation does take a bit of time. It will take many months. That's the way it works, and rightly so. But the government does have this vehicle and this opportunity to do something about this. I know that's what the Lord Chancellor wants to do, and I'm confident that he and the Victims Minister, Ed Argar, will be working very hard on this issue in the weeks ahead.
has refused to attend court for this sentence hearing. Accordingly, I have to sentence her in her absence. I shall deliver the sentencing remarks as if she was present to hear them, and I direct that she is provided with a transcript of my remarks and copies of the victim personal statements read to the court. Lucy Letby, over a period of almost 13 months between June 2015 and June 2016, when in your mid-20s and employed as a neonatal nurse in the Countess of Chester Hospital in Chester, with specialist training in intensive care, you murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others. In the case of one of them, trying on separate occasions 2 weeks apart to murder her. You are now to be sentenced for your crimes. I order payment of the statutory surcharge in the appropriate amount. You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, and in gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions. The babies you harmed were born prematurely, and some were at risk of not surviving. But in each case, you deliberately harmed them, intending to kill them. In your evidence, you said that hurting a baby is completely against everything that being a nurse is, as indeed it should be. You also claimed you never did anything that was meant to hurt a baby, and only ever did your best to care for them. That was but one of the many lies you were found to have told in this case. There is no doubt that you are intelligent and outwardly were a very conscientious, hard-working, knowledgeable, confident and professional nurse, which enabled you repeatedly to harm babies on the unit without arousing suspicion for some time. You prided yourself in your competence. Your fellow neonatal nurses spoke very highly of you, and several of them became your close friends. Having started as a Band 5 nurse at the Countess of Chester in 2012, you became a mentor to student nurses, and in the spring of 2015, gained the qualification that enabled you to care for the sickest babies on the unit, or those requiring the most intensive care. You relished being in the intensive care nursery. Your messages to colleagues revealed an interest in babies that were on or were coming to the unit who had uncommon medical conditions. The methods you employed to carry out your murderous intent were only revealed by the later detailed investigation into the events of and surrounding the collapses and deaths of the babies, which commenced in 2018. There was premeditation, calculation, and cunning in your actions. You specifically targeted twins, and latterly triplets. Some babies were healthy, others had medical issues of which you were aware. The great majority of your victims suffered acute pain as a result of what you did to them. They all fought for survival. Some, sadly, struggled in vain and died. You used a number of different ways to try to kill them, thereby misleading clinicians into believing the collapses had or might have had a natural cause or were a consequence of a developing medical condition. You took opportunities to harm babies when staff were in breaks or away from babies. On some occasions, you falsified records to indicate there were signs of a deterioration before a collapse occurred. You knew that the last thing anyone working in the unit would or did think was that someone caring for the babies was deliberately harming them. As the number of unexpected and unexplained collapses and deaths escalated, senior doctors started to think the unthinkable and consider the possibility that someone was, in fact, deliberately harming the babies, and you were identified as the common factor. You had a detached enthusiasm for the resuscitations and what followed. You endeavoured to impress colleagues and clinicians and sought reassurance from them as to your competence and skills, and would message others to the effect that no one was at fault. On occasions, you cruelly and callously made inappropriate remarks to some of the grieving parents at the time of or in the immediate aftermath of a death. When the homes of both you and your parents were searched, confidential documents relating to babies, including handover and resuscitation sheets and notes and blood gas readings, were found, and there were entries in a diary recording relevant events. Handover sheets relating to all but the first 4 of the babies had been taken from the unit and kept by you. I am satisfied you started to keep these documents after those initial offences in June 2015 as morbid records of the dreadful events surrounding the collapses of your victims and what you had done to them. You had a fascination with the babies and their families, which extended to making repeated searches on Facebook for their parents, sometimes immediately following the events, and on occasions much later. A piece of paper with dense writing on both sides, setting out your thoughts and feelings, was found in the first search of your home in 2018. Amongst the phrases you wrote were, "The world is better off without me," and "I am evil, I did this." The impact of your crimes has been immense, as disclosed by the deeply moving personal statements that have been read to the court this morning. The lives of newborn or relatively newborn babies were ended almost as soon as they began, and lifelong harm has been caused, all in horrific circumstances. Loving parents have been robbed of their cherished children, and others have to live with the physical and mental consequences of your actions. Siblings have been deprived of brothers and sisters. You have caused deep psychological trauma, brought enduring grief and feelings of guilt, caused strains in relationships, and disruption to the lives of all the families of all your victims. It is no part of my function to reach conclusions as to the underlying reason or reasons for your actions, nor could I, for they are known only to you. I must pass appropriate sentences according to law, addressing the seriousness of your offences. The cruelty and calculation of your actions were truly horrific. After these last collapses and deaths, you were suspended from nursing duties, but pursued complaints of being treated unfairly. When your home was later searched, as well as your 2016 diary, which contained references to long days on the 23rd, 24th and 25th of June, and to J, E and M, respectively, there were handover sheets over that period with resuscitation notes written on the back. All, I have no doubt, being records that you kept to remind you of the details of the consequences of what you had done to those children. For the offence of murder, the sentence is fixed by law and is imprisonment for life. You are now 33 years of age and were over 21 when you committed the offences. Pursuant to the relevant prevailing statutory regime, by having regard to Schedule 21 to the Criminal Justice Act 2003, I have to determine whether the seriousness of the offences of murder, individually or in combination, is so exceptionally high that I should not make a minimum term order and you should spend the rest of your life in prison. For offences of attempted murder, whole life sentences of imprisonment are reserved for wholly exceptional cases. Over a period of just under 13 months, you killed 7 fragile babies and attempted to kill 6 others. Some of your victims were only a day or a few days old. All were extremely vulnerable. They were in a hospital where others were striving to provide them with dedicated medical and nursing care. By their nature and number, such murders and attempted murders by a neonatal nurse entrusted to care for them are offences of very exceptional seriousness. The damaging impact of your actions on others working at that hospital, including those who numbered you as a friend, betraying their trust and creating upset and suspicion, as well as eroding confidence in clinicians and nurses generally, aggravates their seriousness. This was a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable of children, knowing that your actions were causing significant physical suffering and would cause untold mental suffering. You created situations so that collapses or causes of collapses would not be obvious or associated with you. You removed and retained confidential records of events relating to your crimes and checked up on bereaved parents. There was a deep malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions. During the course of this trial, you have coldly denied any responsibility for your wrongdoing and sought to attribute some fault to others. You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. In their totality, the offences of murder and attempted murder were of exceptionally high seriousness, and just punishment, according to law, requires a whole life order. Lucy Letby, on each of the 7 offences of murder and the 7 offences of attempted murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Because the seriousness of your offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not apply. The order of the court, therefore, is a whole life order on each and every offence, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison.
Thank you for watching this video in the case of Lucy Letby. Prayers go out to the families and the victims who unfortunately had the misfortune of having Lucy Letby come into their lives. Please, if you don't mind, give this video a like and a share, and if you have not subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing. Have a blessed day, and again, prayers to the victims and the families.